Hey yo, welcome to the Godcast.
I hope y'all are buckled up because things are about to get weird.
I don't understand why you chose me.
You want to change the world, son. So do I.
Where are we at in terms of history on the timeline? Where are we exactly? I'm just trying to uncover the truth and bring forth what I can see as the truth. The Bible seemed to be predicting more things than any other conspiracy theory type information. Look, one thing's for certain, that there is so much power in the name of Jesus Christ. That I know for sure.
Welcome to Godcast.
Welcome to Godcast.
The Goodness Over Darkness.
The Goodness Over Darkness podcast.
Here is your host.
Here's your host, Emmanuel Kingman.
Emmanuel Kingman.
Welcome to the light.
Welcome to the light.
Welcome to the light.
It's showtime. What is going on, everybody? Welcome to Godcast, the Goodness Over Darkness podcast. I'm your host, Emmanuel Kingman, and here with me for the intro is the lovely, magnificent Mimi. Hello, my love. She's off to the side for the video viewers, just in case you are wondering where she is. We are, I got new cameras here, so this is a different camera than I used for the interview. So it's zoomed in a lot, and we have some video
technical
stuff.
issues that we can't use both cameras at once like we wanted to do.
Yeah.
So that I can have like a separate camera.
Right. We'll be getting it fixed here in the coming days and weeks and months. But for now, you'll see a different background I have here because I'm using a different program than what I did for the interview. But it is what it is. But we had a special interview today. We had on special guest Howdie Mickoski.
Loved it.
Just wow. This was a dynamite conversation from beginning to end. There's some mind-blowing stuff, some mind-bending, mind-altering types of concepts that we discuss. And then we get into the World's Fairs. And we don't spend a great deal of time talking about the World's Fairs, but we just put major holes in the mainstream narrative. Did you have something? Well, and we brought up the Georgia Guidestones as well. There's a lot of stuff with that.
Makes me want to go back and kind of do a redo at the Guidestones, do a redo at the mountains, for, to do things that we didn't quite do. Like we didn't take the time to sit at any of the streams that we passed by or waterfalls and meditate. Like, why? Why didn't we think of that? I know we were just kept going, but there was plenty of spots we could.
Well, I meditated at the Georgia Guidestones. You didn't want to. You were taking pictures, but I mean, you were documenting the sunrise, which was a once in a lifetime thing. 4th of July. Me meditating there is a once in a lifetime thing. Maybe
well for the Guidestones, I guess what we didn't do was, like he said, ask people why all these crosses were on their lawns and things. So there's certain things at the places we've been that maybe we just need to revisit. Yeah,
we'll be we love boots on the ground type of stuff. Maybe St. Louis will be a stop for us in the future. Cahokia. We talked about that a little bit. I was getting a big time yes from my head was being moved. Like, yes, Cahokia is a fake site and the real site.
Oh, like me? Okay, good.
Is over. You got that as well?
Well, like I said, when he kept saying the word, my brain was just going hoax. Hoax.
Yeah.
But who knows?
I forgot to bring up the point, the St. Louis Archway is that some kind of gateway into
also on my
Cahokia.
mind that was one of the questions I was going to ask him was, what do you think the arch is, or what's it about, or what's it for, or why is it there? That was on my mind too, and I lost it in the conversation.
I mean, it happens when you're having a conversation of this magnitude. I felt like, okay, like there's a point where there's like spiritual wizards, that people that claim to be, or that you might think are spiritual wizards that are living in mountains, or whatever. Like it's really difficult to find these people, but he's an actual wizard, with his thinking, and I consider myself to be that type of wizard as well. And it's not necessarily a magical thing that I'm talking about, but it's a wizard with words and thoughts and understandings and conveying a message to somebody in a way that they don't think anything like you. And now all of a sudden they're questioning everything. And I mean, this was like a like tennis, if you will, a back and forth that was so beautiful. And it wasn't a match like me against him in any sense, but it was him and I together. We were making this beautiful symphony. And this was a great episode. I know I said it last time that my last episode was my favorite to date. This may be my favorite to date. I mean, it happens all the time that each episode is just my favorite to date, so to speak. And it's not to take away from any of my other guests, but just certain conversations you have with certain people are just really mind blowing and really help you understand the world the way that it is.
Yeah, I was debating sitting in on this one or not, being on camera or not. But I like that I did choose to sit in because I wouldn't have had all of those synchronistic word
So many
things.
synchronicities.
When we were talking about navel things, and that word's been in my
That we talked about this morning.
in my everyday stuff lately.
Mhm.
And then when he was telling his near-death experience story of he almost drowned. That made me think of who was the other guest that we had that almost drowned and was saved by
That
the
was,
quote unquote park
Smokestack.
ranger. Okay. I was trying to figure out who
Yeah, it's
that
episode
was.
65.
And then I was thinking about my, when I almost drowned when I was younger. So it was a lot for me
The
to take
waterfall
in.
background
And,
when
a
he's
lot of
talking
puzzle
about the
pieces for
waterfall.
me. Yes. Yes.
That I just plugged that in there 5 minutes before the show, before the interview happened. I was changing my background and it was a waterfall picture. So most of the times when you guys see the virtual backgrounds, this one isn't a picture that me or Mimi took, but I always try using photos that we have taken. It means more to me that way, that it's a very unique photo. This one I just put up because, like I said, I'm having the technical issues. It was just easier. And this one is like a majestic type of background. But I just happened to put that up there, and I didn't know that his near-death experience
Involved a
a
waterfall.
waterfall.
Yeah.
I've heard him speak before, and I don't remember it being a waterfall. Now, maybe I did hear that, and it just was in one ear out the other. But when he said that, I was like, oh, I just put up this waterfall for this episode. So it's just the synchronicities. And Mimi was asking me this morning about naval and the U.S. Navy,
and certain places being the navel of certain,
Right.
places.
Right. And then he says that word navel several times. And at one point he was saying,
It's like I never hear that word, and now all of a
Right.
sudden I hear it all the time.
right. And he was saying that there are certain energy centers all over, that maybe the Georgia Guidestones is one. And he mentioned several. And at the same time, we both said the words like the earth chakra at the same exact time. And then I was getting a big time yes again from I don't know what it is, this force that makes my head say yes sometimes. You'll see my head will bobble yes sometimes, and you'll see it say no when my guests are speaking to me. I typically don't say the no's to people. It's just I can't stop my head. It's a force that is forcing my head to say yes or no so that I understand what it is. It's like I'm a dowsing rod essentially, and I'm being told the answer. But when it's a no, I don't really say it, but you can see my head movements and you can pick up on that if you're paying attention.
Reminds me of Truth Seeker's meditation where I drop my
Your
head
nodded.
about 5 seconds before the meditation said, and then
Yeah,
you bow your head. And I'm like, oh man.
Yeah. So I was getting big time yeses on several stuff. It was a ding 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 actually. It wasn't even, he said maybe there's like not 7 but 15, and all I hear is ding 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 in my head, and my head's bobbing up and down, and it's like, yeah, you hit the spot on for that one. So it's a lot of interesting stuff in this.
Have Howdie Mickoski and Michelle Gibson ever talked? Because I think
I
that
don't
would be
know. That'd be
banger of a
epic.
conversation. I think we need to work on that. Maybe I shouldn't have put that in the intro. Sorry.
Well, maybe I will be doing a roundtable with some of my favorite crypto historians, if you will,
Just
and
very versed in the
they're both
same
at the top of
things.
the list. Yeah,
Yeah,
that Michelle Gibson, Howdie Mickoski. There's other
wealths
people.
of knowledge.
Yeah, there's other people that I haven't spoken to. I like having my roundtables with guests that I've spoken to for the most part, because we have a rapport and an understanding of each other already. So maybe I will try to do that, and I haven't spoken to Conspiracy RS. So I'm going to try to speak to that guy, or maybe get him on as well. Yeah, whatever, however that may occur sometime in the future. But I like doing the roundtable series with like-minded people who bring different aspects of the game, and what you're saying with Howdie and Michelle Gibson.
I think that would be an incredible conversation.
Yeah, we mentioned John Levy in this as well.
And he mentioned Richard Rose, and I'm gonna look him up.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with him, but yeah, I mean, if Howdie's finding information from these people, then I'm sure that I would find a tremendous wealth of knowledge from them as well. You know, Howdie is really well studied in all this stuff that we talk about. So like I said, he's just like a wizard with words and understandings, and he's on another level than most people. And having that conversation with him, it was great. It was a great back and forth. Just like I said, like an epic tennis match of this person says this person says that, and it was tremendous.
I think I remember when we were this is silly, that's why I'm laughing to myself, when we were driving to the mountains and we were playing that car game, and where you use the first letter of the last name to name the next person. And I remember using Howdie Mickoski as my person, and I think after that you used Michelle Gibson as your person, because you have to use the, yeah that's what made me laugh.
Maybe that did happen. I don't recall that, but we said a lot of names. We went on for like an hour and a half, 2 hours.
Yeah, a long time, but it did pass the time.
Yeah, it does. And it's a fun time too. You poke fun at each other a little bit. It's
funny because then you just start pulling names out of anywhere.
Yeah.
Charlie Brown.
So the last thing that I want to touch on in the intro is I want everyone to go to my website, emmanuelkingman.com, go to my blog, and read the entry I just wrote. It's called WTF is a Tartarian. Go if you know what Tartaria is. If you don't know what Tartaria is,
if you're curious,
if you have somewhat of an understanding, no matter what your understanding of it is, go there, and it will give you a pretty good understanding if you don't have one already. And if you do have one already, it's going to level you up in a major way, because we don't cover the why section of the cover up often in the conspiracy theory community, and the conspiracy theory community doesn't have what the Christian perspective does as the millennial kingdom. And I kind of merged the two, and it's not just merging the two, but it's bringing in just evidence of everywhere. It doesn't really matter of just this one versus this one, but it's kind of the combination is what I do here. And I think a lot of people will benefit from understanding this, because even most Christians don't come to the conclusion that I do, the end conclusion that we're about to be at final judgment, or we are at final judgment. So maybe you guys can read this, and I don't want to say that this is from God. A lot of people will say this is from God. God has led me into studying these things and understanding these things in the magnitude that I do. I have a very good grasp on everything that I speak of in there, pretty much. Well, not a good grasp on it, but enough of it to speak on it somewhat. And I just want everyone to try to go there with an open mind and read this and share it around, because I really do feel that I'm being called to share this with a bunch of people. I messaged this directly to a lot of podcasting friends that I've gathered, and not just podcasting friends, but people from all walks that I've garnered all these relationships, and I was called to do that. So whether that's, I don't know what the reason for that would be, but the end conclusion that I have is pretty mind-blowing. So I would like you all to go there and read that and share that article around if you can. Oh, and I did want to mention one more thing about Howdy. So he said, it was funny, he said that at one point that I must have read his book extremely well, and to have the great understanding. I actually haven't got to finish the book. So I read some of it,
Is
but
this the
because
page you're on?
because I'm so busy with doing the podcast and life and everything, I haven't gotten to actually finish it. So it was just funny when he said that. It's like I get my information, I'm kind of just have these thoughts. So maybe it's like the way Edgar Casey used to just fall asleep on a book and then he would know what the book is.
Yeah.
When I incorporate something into my life, when I bring it into my home, that my home is my mind.
I've
essentially
heard that before, that when you're studying for something, you should put it under your pillow or something.
Yeah, it's an Edgar Casey thing.
Ah.
So when I bring things into my home is representative of my mind. So when I'm meditating in the same room as these things, I guess the thoughts just come alive, the energies come out of it, and I come to these understandings. And it's whether I'm watching YouTube videos or listening to podcasts or whatever, I'm garnering this information from all these different sources, and it turns out that it's, oh yeah, someone wrote that book, someone made that movie, someone said that exact thing where somewhere else, and I'm like, oh, I don't know who that is. I've never heard of that movie, I've never read that book, but I have a full understanding the same way that it's presented in there from just really meditating and going about my daily life and having these thoughts. And I always have the question, where do thoughts come from? We really don't know where thoughts come from. We just don't. So this episode, this is really going to open you guys up. I want you to go check out Howdy's YouTube page, his website. Go send our love. He said something at the end there that I wasn't going to say on air, but he did, that he wasn't going to come on because I talk about Christ and Jesus, and he checked out a few episodes and he was like, I don't know that we'll mesh well. And I said, well, I like to bring on people who think differently. I have the roundtable series of people who think differently in order to come together to an understanding.
To find the similarities.
Yeah, to find the similarities and to come to an agreement. And he didn't want to, it's not that he's against Jesus. He didn't want us to clash, is what his message was, is that he didn't want to have arguing or anything like that, any kind of negativity. And I agree. I don't want any of that type of stuff either. So it was a great honor that he would come on and that he would say such high praise that I convinced him with my message was so well
Clear.
put.
He said your return email was very clear, and that's what made me say yes. He said.
Yeah. So that's how I really try to approach everybody when I speak to them. And when you have someone as open-minded and honest as Howdie Mickoski, they can see the honesty and the open-mindedness, and they're like, oh, okay, yeah, that's what I want to be a part of. So I really try treating everybody in that manner, and I'm so glad that Howdie received it well and that he changed his mind and he came on, because this is an episode for the ages. If you guys wouldn't mind liking, sharing, rate, review, commenting, however you can interact with this episode wherever you're watching it from to help beat the algorithms, whether it's YouTube or an audio podcast somewhere. Go to my website, emmanuelkingman.com, and you can hit me up for some energy work. You can hit me up for a consultation. But the one thing that really helps me out with this podcast more than anything is your interaction with the show and sharing it around and just bringing this information to somebody who it might resonate with, somebody who it might help. And I think this episode could help anybody on any level. Just, tell them to press play and listen. So I think that's going to do it for the intro.
I think so.
All right. So without further ado, here is Howdie Mickoski. Hello, everybody. On today's episode, I have on a guest who has been finding the truth of reality for many years. He has some really mind bending thoughts, experiences, and research. He is author of a book called Exposing the Expositions. Everybody, welcome Howdie Mickoski to the show. Welcome to the show, Howdie. How are you, my friend?
It's always a bit cold in Norway, It's but today I think it's like -8 Celsius, so it's like livable.
Wow. Livable, -8's livable. So I imagine that it must be get up to like what, -20, -30?
Yeah, -18, -20 the last few days, so
Wow.
yeah.
Do you enjoy the cold weather?
No, I hate it.
Are you from Norway? Are you from America? You
No,
don't sound
Canada.
like you have an accent. Okay, Canada.
Yeah, yeah. So I wasn't smart enough to, move to, Mexico or Italy or, you know. Thankfully, I didn't move to Australia. That was now a good
Oh
move,
yeah,
but
yeah, very good move.
yeah.
Yeah. So howdy, it's quite the honor to have you on my show. You had some very interesting things. You were on Tinfoil Hat is where I first heard you at, and I bought your book immediately while you were still talking. I told my girlfriend, I said, I feel like a piece of my soul was taken from me when I listened to that episode because of the way that you broke down the the lie that is the World's Fairs. It really did something to me. It was like, I don't want to say it took a piece of my soul, but it was like, wow, this lie is so obvious and so huge that it felt very crushing to me.
Right.
And even as awake as I was at the time, sometimes we just get some information that just, it really is a
Blows
blow
your
to
mind.
us. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I can same way for me, sometimes it's just and it's it's one thing that's something specific to you somehow. And that's the thing. It just like a door opens as soon as you get it. That's what it was like when I watched the ancient Egypt program when I was 28 and in the middle of that depression.
Mhm.
And when that program came on TV, it's the same thing. It just felt like a whole load of like a mountain of heaviness just dropped off my back,
Mhm.
and something just opened. So I can know what people mean when they talk about stuff like that.
Yeah, and you said something else in there that I've actually repeated a couple times on podcasts when I've been a guest, and I've given you credit for it because it is a really great thought that you can't really ever know the truth, but what we do is we gather information and then we can lose the lies. We can understand that there's lies. So it's really hard to say what's true when there's so many possibilities, but instead of trying to say this is true and hold on to this, you say, oh, this isn't true, let me let go of this. And then
Right.
when you change your perception in that manner, it really helps you understand everything.
It helps you understand, and it makes it doable. Everybody can drop something false. I'm drinking, uh, 4 glasses of booze in the evening. I shouldn't do that. That's not good for my health. I can drop that. Like there's something. There's little things we can do. It doesn't even have to be big things at the beginning. Any little thing you find that's false, it's not good for you. You can drop that. Trying to say I'm going to get the truth, or I know the truth, or I'm holding the truth. You're walking into some pretty dangerous territory when you're doing that. Generally, I like Richard Rose, who was very good at explaining this. He sort of said, what you're doing, if you ever do find the truth, you've spent a lifetime of dropping false, and in a sense, you accidentally walk backward into the truth. One day, there's nothing left to drop, and like, oh wow, that's it.
Mhm.
So it's this backwards kind of normal thinking. We're trying to go after what we think it is, and trying to create a persona, an identity, and a way of living that will take us there, as opposed to all you got to do is just look for something false and see through it and move on.
Right, and the way that you're describing in the beginning there of changing little things, letting go of things, I see it's like the Fibonacci sequence, right? We have a point,
Mm,
and then it's like coming around the mountain when she comes, and every time you go around that section again, you lose a little bit more. You're like, okay, I can let go of this, I can let go of this, and it's not that you don't hold on to anything. I don't want anyone thinking that we're saying, don't have any beliefs, but it's don't be so solid in your beliefs that you just dismiss credible evidence
right.
because then you are doing a disservice to yourself and others who you speak to.
Yeah, as long as you know whatever belief you're carrying, you know that it's a belief I currently have now based on the information that I have, right? I have beliefs too. But I know that tomorrow something new could all of a sudden come into my, sphere of influence, and all of a sudden something I've held as a belief yesterday won't be one tomorrow.
Right.
So as long as you're working with that, that allows you to be here in the moment and live your life. But it also means I'm not going to lock into anything then and say, um, I have to hold on to this, because as soon as you grasp to anything, you can already start blinding yourself, because you're not, I guess, until you until you get to the end, you don't know for sure what is true or what isn't true, but you can certainly find false. And yeah, like you say, with whether it was the fairs, whether it was looking into ancient Egypt, when I first started looking into that and seeing the massive false that was under, when I looked into what you might call spiritual teachings, as I was kind of trying to live a spiritual life, and started realizing more and more that that's kind of junk. Actually, the presentation of it is not really, it doesn't really do anything like it promises. And so the more really, that's what I was doing in my whole life. I was just finding things that were lies, but I had to go towards something that I thought might be taking me to something truthful, only to find out that's more lies too.
Oh, so what part of the ancient Egypt thing are you talking about was more lies? Is it Egypt is only 2,000 years old part, or is it that the spiritual teachings of Egypt are you talking about?
Oh, it's a little bit of both, actually. Yeah, I
Okay.
mean, one is well, it's a combination of things. 'Cause that was the first thing I started 25 years ago now, which was, like I say, after really messy life and difficult times. Not that others haven't had way more difficult lives than I have, but mine was hard. It was tough, was challenging. Um, and then coming out of that depression, when I started studying Egypt, I got really lucky into start recognizing somehow early on that the standard archaeological teachings of copper tools and stone tools, being able to carve these granite and diorite statues, are just impossible. They were showing laser cuts and diamond drills and lathe marks, and then yeah, then we start talking about the age of things, and you start realizing that no, you've got to push this thing back 5, 10, 15, 20,000 or more. And then I got fooled for a while, because I still started to believe this thing called the Old Kingdom. So the oldest of Pharaonic Egypt had this, they're the ones that had all this special knowledge, and it kind of deteriorated from them. That was what I had in my mind at the beginning. And if you read Power of Then, my book on Egypt, it's that thinking, that belief, we'll call it belief, that belief is still in there. And it actually took watching and spending time with a Russian researcher who died a few years ago, but he was outstanding. He helped sort of give me my last push to see that, oh no, all of the really amazing, not that Old Kingdom Egypt didn't have power and knowledge and understanding, but they didn't have anything to do with the pyramids. They didn't have anything to do with the really key carving and some of the best statues. That's from even before that. And once I realized there was even the division between what we know of as ancient Egypt, as in Pharaonic Egypt, all the different layers, and this period before, that was the thing that shook the last little bit of it out of me. And again, whoever made these structures, for anyone who's ever been there, who's watching now, if you've ever been to these sites, be it Dashur or Saqqara, or even in Mexico to Teotihuacan or Pumapunku in Peru, you know instantaneously that, like, we as the humans we know of now, we didn't make this stuff. You know, and it's not that aliens made it. I mean, humans made it. I mean, it's a that's why it's so important to me, because it was showing the possibility that the human mind and the human spirit can do when you're in, you might say, a balanced, purified, a very high energy state. You can create things that you're not supposed to be able to do. And I realized early on, we've been under a system of lies for hundreds of years to hide this information from us, because if all of a sudden humans started tapping into their own power and our own complete intelligence, well, none of this world would be here. We would clean this up in a month.
Yeah, that's very interesting. One of my awakening moments, if you will, was watching Magical Egypt, John Anthony West,
Mm,
and they're looking at the Sphinx, Dr. Robert Schoch, the weathering patterns, and they're saying, no, this isn't from 2000 BC. This must be from when there was actually flooding here, which is much, much earlier. And then when you
right.
get into the Sphinx, is a lion, and it could be from 13,000 years ago, or it could be from the last processional cycle before that, which is about 36,000 or so years ago.
Right.
And now we're talking about, okay, how old is everything? But then when I started getting into this World's Fair stuff and getting into this quote unquote Tartaria, Tartaria is just an umbrella term for all of this stuff,
Yeah.
this architecture in the 1800s and all. Now I'm at a point where I'm finding Anatoly Fomenko, and like, is everything just created here? Is this place just a place that was created by a creator, and then we inhabited it, and then we're told all these things existed at this time period, at this time period? What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, there's a really good line of starting to think, right? Which is we've been told the Earth is X number of whatever billion years old, and it's been habited for hundreds of thousands of years, and etc. But if this reality isn't what we think it is, if reality is more, I don't like to necessarily call it like a simulation or like some sort of computer program, because it's not.
Like
It's
an
not like that. But
organic
yeah,
thing?
but sort of an external created structure, not the way we've been told that it is more similar to what you would find in a computer simulation. If it's more like that,
Hmm.
then we actually have there would be a starting point. There would be a zero, a real 0 point, a real zero, and there would only be what we're calling living since that point, and everything from before that is just program code. It's not actually real from our experience. And the problem we have is, if that's true, we have no idea when the 0 point could have been.
Hmm.
Was it 200 years ago? Was it 3,000 years ago? Was it 25 years ago? We have no idea when because if it starts to blow your mind when you start to contemplate the possibility that it could have happened in my lifetime, that at the age of 12 is when the whole thing switched on. And so
Hmm.
like just like a robot in Westworld, right? The robots in Westworld have a backstory, and they fully believe whatever's in the backstory happened to them, really, when of course nothing happened. They just woke up one day from when they turned the machine on, and they started living their Westworld life, and everything else is just this conglomerate of information for them to behave a certain way. How do we know what's really real and what's backstory?
Hmm.
And as you sort of talked about before we got on, when I did all these experiments that were testing reality 20 years ago, when I was trying to get an answer for what reality is, and when it was failing constantly, now the kind of subject you're bringing up is something that you have to take quite seriously, because once you see reality isn't so solid and isn't so real, then you don't really know what it is, and
Hmm.
all sorts of options are thrown on the table.
Yeah, I have this thought that I can't verify anything before the time I was born. That was my original thought. Then I was like, well, I can't really verify because you can't verify anything outside of your own experience, really. And
Right.
when I said I was born, and then I was like, well, actually, I don't remember when I was born. And then I talked to a gentleman who had his first memories telling me about it. And it was this wild thing where he's with this female energy, and then he comes to in his body, and he's like, oh, you're my brother, oh, you're my cousin, and he's like 3 4 years old, and he just had,
Mm,
like, was he just plopped in here at that moment?
Programmed. Yeah.
Yes, so it's a very
wow.
interesting
I was just thinking that before you said that. I was like, I remember when Todd said, I don't remember anything, prior to when I was born. Was I just thrown in here with these are your
yeah,
memories? Just pretend these are your memories.
right, like, this 0 point. So the way that I see time really is
Yeah.
everything is like this ball, and there's a point, and then everything comes off of that point, but then it zooms back around to that exact point, and it's like that was all of creation, the alpha and omega, if you will, the beginning and the end is every single moment. So it's a very weird concept when we start to get into, is there a 0 point? Is there an actual
Right.
starting point? And I feel that there kind of has to be some kind of starting point and end point, but it's on such a grand scale that we could never comprehend it. Uh,
Well,
everything is a repeating fractal.
yeah, well, here's something interesting because I mentioned this in a couple of videos I had back, and somebody left a comment because I was talking about BC and AD, right, and what these might mean, and what could the real 0 point be. And somebody left a comment that said, but if you think about the alphabet, those are the first 4 letters of the alphabet, but they don't sit that way. They sit A, B, C, D. So BC in our alphabet is actually between A and D. So
Mm,
giving you this idea that is BC like the dot or the center point of this sort of like time wheel like you're talking about, and then the AD is this circular thing that just runs like the Ouroboros around the outside. So is it
wow.
possible that the BC is like within the was like the center, the whole center
Oh
point is
man,
BC, and then AD, yeah, and AD, and we're living on the edge of the wheel.
I love
And like,
that. And
isn't that interesting?
I just had this conversation with Ken and May. It was actually about a month ago, but I'm in the middle of making a new intro for my podcast. And in there, I said something to him. So I'm going back and listening to it. And he says he uses the term before Christ, before, as in for myself, as in for himself, because there was a time period before Christ. And then there's a time AD, after, Anno Domini, once we understood, and he used it in the personal sense, and that
Right.
really blew my mind as well. And what you're saying here kind of goes with that. It's a synchronicity that just 20 minutes before we're talking, I listened to that, and now I hear this, and
Hmm.
I'm seeing this in my mind's eye right now, and it's really blowing my mind. But we came in kind of hot here. If you do want to respond to that before we get into the next part, you can go ahead and do that. But I do want to get into
Go
who
ahead.
who you are, how you kind of really got here,
Yeah.
because I know that you have some credentials into the academia world, and I want the audience to know that we're not just two crazy guys up here speaking some wild thoughts, but there is an actual understanding that you've come to in the matrix world, if you will, first before you broke free of it.
I guess. I mean, so I grew up in a challenging situation. I almost died as a baby.
Mm,
Um, so I had that kind of in my genetics and my memory. I grew up with a father that was a psychopath. Um, so that was always a messy kind of household, obviously, when you're dealing with that. However, it does make you start being aware because you have to read the psychopath 5 minutes before they act, right? You have to start being able to know where are they, what's going to set them off, what's going to do this. So you're kind of being very aware.
weather the room, if you will.
Yeah, and then by moving into being a comedian, which was kind of the initial life path I really wanted to follow. Also, the comedian's mind is very different from the average mind because the comedian's mind, the average person sees strange things constantly. They'll see a strange sign on a window. They'll see a car parked in a weird direction. But the comedian stops and tries to see not only it's weird, why is it weird, and how can I present the weirdness to people on a stage, right? So your mind is operating in a little bit different way. So I had this very creative mind for a while. Then I went to university, took 4 years of getting a history degree, and it made me learn how to research. It was excellent for that. It did destroy some of my creativity. University pulls the creativity out of you because
Hmm.
it very much forces you to conform, right? That's kind of what it does. So as I was coming out of that, coming out of some real mess with my father, and then my an ex-girlfriend was murdered, and when Joan was murdered, that really it threw me for a loop at the time because I was already in a really difficult place, and now I was looking at someone who was living their life perfectly. I mean, she was intelligent, young, she was a scholar, she had got a specialized scholarship to do her master's degree at another university. Just a beautiful, lovely, wonderful human being, dead.
Mm.
And I started wondering, well, why am I living my life following the rules when it obviously doesn't really work out? The way we've been told to live life doesn't. And so I was thrown for a while into a real spiral of thought. And that's really what it was. It was an inner spiral of thought. I mean, there was an external like depression and a wall, and I don't talk to me about this, but internally I was really asking deep questions about why the world is the way it is, and why, and that is the beginning of the spiritual search. People are hoping a spiritual search will come with something mystical and magical and bright lights in the sky and trumpets and whatever, right? They hope it comes, usually it comes from something traumatic, something difficult, something that will push us to want to ask questions we know have been there in our world, but we've avoided. And now with the tragedy, we can't hide anymore from it. The tragedy has put our inside outside, kind of. So I went through that for a few years of this sort of, like I say, this meandering depression of attempting to be a comedian, and just the best way I could describe that period of my life is I was becoming mean and manipulative,
Hmm.
So
which
like the dark night
was
of the soul.
no, not at all. A dark night of a
Okay.
soul is something completely different. This is just going through this is just going through difficulty, really, really difficulty. And when I was at the point of I was wanting to kill myself
Hmm.
because I was so unhappy, but couldn't come up with a really non-messy way to do it, that's when the ancient Egyptian program came on. And this program, which I now would debunk, I mean, if we wanted to talk about it, it was a Nova pyramid building program from like 1997 or something. I would debunk all of it, but the program pushed me in a direction, and it gave me all of my energy back, and threw me into the search. And then from the search, I'll stop talking in a second here, then you can ask questions. Um, it threw me into a place then of, well, not just using my historical research background of how to research books and how to ask questions, but it made me realize I can't understand the ancient world if I don't learn to think like I'm in the ancient world. I can't think like a modern person like I was and understand the ancient world. And once I wanted to do that, that's where it pushed me into meeting a Korean Zen monk, and spent a lot of time with him, with 3 or 4 native Indian medicine men, time on their reserves. 2 different qigong doctors from China. There was medicine people from the Amazon that I met, and I mean, it was like for a while they just kind of, I bumped into them. It's almost like I would open a door and there they were. They were just standing
Hmm.
there, you know. And a friend of mine was very clear early on when this had started for me. He took me to like a new age bookshop and took me to the back where the bulletin board was with all the workshops listed on there. And he said, I want you to look at this board, and I want you to realize that if anybody has real wisdom or knowledge, they're not on this board, because they're not out there selling themselves. They're not making a business. They don't have an organization. They're actually staying really low key, and they're just teaching people who really want to know. That's who
Hmm.
you've got to go find. So I spent 5 or 6 years, yeah, doing that until I hit the 2005 death experience. But that was the first segment of work.
Well, so there was a lot of very interesting things in there, and
Mm.
what I'm picking up on is that you really were done with the Matrix world, that you were done with, and then God started showing you all the synchronicities of, okay, there is something more. You weren't content with just being anymore, and it took traumatic experiences, and maybe that is what it is, that we have to not want to be part of the Matrix anymore, and maybe it is trauma that at least for this version of the Matrix right now, that makes us need to break out of it. Because there's some traumatic things you talked about: a near-death experience as a baby, your girlfriend being murdered, and then now another near-death experience, suicidal, the thoughts that you were having. I mean, there are a lot of different traumatic things that have occurred in that period. Uh, so do you want to lead us into the next near death experience that you were just getting into?
Well, but I guess what I could say to sort of follow that is, for sure. I mean, I definitely feel helped, especially in that period. I totally feel like something was helping me. Um, Maybe not necessarily. Maybe I don't say necessarily helping me during all the traumatic experiences per se. But I mean, I still look back at Joan's murder as being a really important part of my life. I wouldn't be sitting here being able to talk to you about these things if I hadn't gone through that. If my life had been super smooth and easy and clear, not much would have really happened, because like you say, unfortunately it's the trauma that opens our real seeking. That's what pushes us into um, going deeper. And yeah, I mean, in a way, I was done with the Matrix. That's what I want to say was when I was living. So that was about Toronto. Like this experience with the TV program happened in like 1997. But around 1995, I was standing in a subway station in Toronto at like 8 o'clock in the morning, coming home from some girl's house, I guess, and the doors opened and everybody was coming out going to work, right? They had their suits and their briefcases, and they looked like cattle going to get slaughtered. That was the same. It's like I could see cows on their face.
Mm.
And I just said, I'm never going to do that. I don't care what it takes. I'm never going to do that. And it almost got to the point where I really thought then about, I think I'll just go get a cabin and live by myself in the woods, with like no electricity, no nothing, just literally just be by myself in the woods. And I was
Like a monk
really
on a
close to
mountain.
doing it. Yeah, just saying, like, so I could say in one sense, I had said no to the Matrix world, but not completely.
Mm-hmm.
I got pulled back in. Um, not saying that's a bad thing to be dealing with being in the Matrix, and I'm not saying it's a good thing to necessarily run out in a tent by the forest. It all depends on you and what you need at any moment and what's going on, right? But
Mm-hmm.
for sure, in some way, I had cut off a lot of sort of, again, this is what you're supposed to do. This is how you're supposed to live. This is what you're supposed to like. This is what and it was somewhere in that, because as I was pushing everything away, nothing was coming to replace it until the Egypt program, which I really feel was like some
Gave you
sort
new
of,
life.
yeah, some sort of deity spirit, something happened in that moment. I talk a lot about demonic beings and parasitic entities and evil in this world, but the good stuff does shine through once in a while. It just seems to happen way less frequently, and you have to really catch it when it does. I happen to
Right.
catch that one. So yeah. So I made it through 6 hard years of work. I wrote the book, made it to Egypt, um, did the work I needed to do there, went to Mexico, did the research I needed to do there, and was doing whatever these teachers suggested to do. I did them. I was probably doing 16, 18 hours a day of just exercises and work. I did a complete life recapitulation. That took me 4 years. I was doing these really complex, what Castaneda would call not doings, where you're literally acting in really odd behavior patterns in order to test what your mind will do. I was going on these like 2-3 hour long walks designed to break reality down in the middle of the walk. I mean, it was just, so I did this for 6 years and thought I was pretty smart at this point. I thought I knew a lot.
How old
And
were you approximately?
now I would be 35
Okay.
ish. So yeah, I've put in 6 hard years of this work, and yeah, thought I knew a lot. Then I went to on a hiking trip with a friend of mine into the Calgary Mountains near at Johnson Canyon, actually, which is a big waterfall in the area, famous waterfall in the area. And I didn't know about it. I'd never been there. I just heard the name, and we were hiking close to it. And there was this really hard river running, and these really nice sort of ledges. So, let's go sit there and meditate. That would be a great idea. And in the course of sitting there, I fell in. And in the falling into this river, I realized it was going to be one hell of a struggle to get out. It was like again, a canyon that was funneling towards the waterfall. So I was almost at the waterfall. I didn't know that. So the water was moving. It didn't, in one sense, it didn't look as fast underneath as it did on the top, right? It's just. So I swam as hard as I could back to my friend who was still on the bank, realizing that he's kind of like my savior.
Did he know you fell in?
Oh yeah, he was
Okay.
first he was running to look for a branch or something that he could use as, like, to try to help me pull me in with. But he didn't have time to get that. I'd already swum to the shore. I never checked to see how shallow it was, which was my first error for some reason. I reached for his hand, just natural, non-thinking kind of stuff, and pulled him in too. And like I say in the book, my response was, oh no, now we're in trouble. Because now I realize there's nobody on the shore. And now I'm no longer flat because I've been swimming this way. And from the push, I was now upright. So the water was just driving me backwards. I had no ability to block it, right? And when that happened, I kind of just realized, oh, this is where I'm going to die. What an interesting way for it to happen. Like that's all it was. It just was interesting and odd that of the 10 million ways you could die, I'm going to die this way, going over a canyon fall. And I had no desire to keep living. There was no need for anything more to happen. It was just, okay, I'm going to die and I'm going to have like front row seats to watch it. That's kind of how it was, this complete acceptance of the situation. And this is happening now in microseconds that I'm talking about. But in the middle of the microseconds came all that I could think of, all I could classify as me. So thought, experiences, memory, hopes, dreams, everything that I could ever classify as myself was gone. It had literally just disappeared. And all there was in this moment was what I could call like an observing awareness. And I knew that observing awareness was me. I knew that all this other stuff that I had claimed and thought it was me wasn't. That was just like a mask or a shadow or like a thing I was wearing over top of this awareness. And so, because I, like I say, I'd done 6 years, I'd broken down reality, and I realized, oh yeah, reality's not real. I could tell you later all the weird stuff that happened. It was wild. But but I'm real. The classic spiritual mistake. The world is fake, but I'm real. And this was kind of the last thing of, oh yeah, I'm fake too. Right. Of course. How did I not see that kind of thing? Yeah. And then just as I had that, all of a sudden what started coming up is what I'm calling clusters of information, because it wasn't thought. It was like complete pieces of information would first come up and then just like explode in front of your awareness. And I had complete understanding of what was trying to be said there. So that happened for a while. I had these complete pieces of understanding. That's how I learned I'm fake. This stuff is not me. This is an awareness. It was all these clusters of information. Then I got what I would call like a computer download. It was like a stick was placed in the back of my head, and I could feel like almost like data just streaming into my head all of a sudden. And like I don't doubt the book that I wrote later on the World's Fairs, the one that you're talking about, that came in the canyon. It actually showed up there. It just took me that book. It took me 10 years to later go and figure it out that I needed to write the book, but it was in there. And I'm actually still spending time trying to dig through the computer, you might say, trying to find the folders and figure out what went in there. So that was in the next kind of like couple of microseconds. And then I turned back to my friend and saw him dog paddling in place and kind of realized this was now, again, one of these clusters of information. It was, if I don't get out, how is he going to get out? And at that second, I hit a boulder with my leg. It veered me a bit off to the right. It was a little bit shallow, and I could kind of crawl myself out just before the falls area. And as I was screaming to him, and I was going to do the same thing he was going to do, run and get a tree branch, I saw him crawling out at the exact same time.
Wow.
And and then we just sat there for like 2 hours and just talked about our experience.
Wow, that is quite the incredible experience. Time operated in a different manner. You let go of your ego self, everything that you had built up. You had come to the realization that your ego self was exactly what the rest of the world was. And there's in a spiritual sense, uh, and I'm not coming at any Buddhist or anything, but the Buddhist sense that we think that everything else is fake but us, we're everything. And you're saying that's how you kind of felt, and then that was taken from you. It was like you were being stripped down, and it's very symbolic that it was a waterfall, because we are water essentially, and everything was falling away from you. It was being pulled away, it was hitting your body, rushing away. This is a very symbolic understanding as an outsider. So I could only imagine experiencing that yourself, how devastating it would be in the moment, and then have to come back to reality and say, oh, I need to get out of here. My friend is also there. And maybe before that, at that point, you said, oh, my friend's not real. The reality is not real. I'm the only one that's real. and then you have that realization in microseconds, as you mentioned, and then come to the realization, I need to be his savior when you thought he was going to be your savior. This is a whole wow experience to me as someone observing it and listening to it. And I have these abilities that I can see people's memories as they're remembering it. I can feel the feelings that they're talking about. And how odd is it that I made my background for this episode a waterfall? I just did this right before. I changed my background fairly often, and I didn't know that it was actually a waterfall that you sat near. And this is just a very much a wow experience for me, experiencing it through your thoughts and memories right now. This and just I'm pretty much at a loss for words to hold on to any part of that one story because it is so encompassing.
So were we, and again, once I'd had the experience, a couple of things happened. It changed a lot, obviously. But I made a lot of mistakes too, and I can share some of the mistakes. But some of the things that happened, interestingly, at the beginning was, of course, one, there was no more fear for a while. Like literally, there was nothing anymore to be afraid of. So it was, and I was living completely in the moment and bizarrely manifesting automatically. If I thought of something, it happened like immediately almost, which got to be a bit scary, because it's like if I realized if I accidentally had a thought of my friend's house on fire, is the house going to catch on fire because I thought of it, like it was. So I had this kind of going on for a while.
That happens to me pretty often too.
Yeah.
It's scary. You have to control your thoughts.
Yeah. So I had that part of it going on, and then I began to start seeing a combination of one, so much of the spiritual things I thought I knew, so much of the work that I thought I'd done that was valuable, I started to see it's probably not that valuable, given what the experience has actually revealed to me. It then took me back because I had read a lot of, whether it be Buddhist scriptures, I'd read like huge parts of the New Testament, the Gnostic Gospels, the Hindu texts. I mean, I read everything along the way. There was no area that I was avoiding when I was doing my research. Right, a lot of alchemic texts, a lot of hermetic texts, and now I could start to realize, oh, wait a minute, actually, this thing in the New Testament, this part of the Buddhist scriptures, it's talking about what happened in the canyon. And I couldn't have known that until I had gone through so many parts of these religious texts. In a sense, you can't actually understand what it's talking about until you've been in the same place that the text is actually referring to. So I realized that there was a whole like secondary level to them that I'd completely missed, and I now know there's even probably a third level that I still don't even know myself that's there. That if you have the third experience, I could read them again completely different, right?
Right.
So I had these things happen for a while of trying to reconcile where I'd been, what I thought I knew, and what the experience had revealed, and changed who I was reading and what I was reading. The trick I got into, and this is the warning I'm going to share with anybody who may have something like this, may have had something like this, or will have something. The challenge is you think your ego has been destroyed, because it is gone for a while. Or at least in my case, it was gone. And I thought it'd be gone forever. It's just damaged, and it's retreated, and it's fixing itself, and it's going to come back. And when it comes back, it can trick you even more than you were tricked before. Yeah. It's unbelievable to see how it can operate. So that's one problem. The second problem is this thing called where you gain a spiritual ego from it. You start to think, I know everything now. And the problem is, so if you look at the screen that you're looking at, let's pretend the computer screen is the totality of everything. This is everything you can know, the screen you're looking at. And what happened is in the experience, I got a light shone like on this part, like the upper part of the screen. I have camera somewhere, but one little part of it, that got a light shone on it. So I saw that perfectly, and that's something that I know even now, 100% I know. But since everything is a hologram, it's holographic, a part contains the whole. So in a sense, I did see the whole in the experience, the whole of reality, but most of it was fuzzy, right? Only a part of it was actually clear, but the confusion was because you did see little pieces of everything, you think you know everything.
Exactly.
And so again, it took me a number of years to make a lot of really weird errors and do some strange things that were had the best of intentions behind them, but with some egoic stuff and with this spiritual ego thinking that I'm higher elevated than I really was, just created confusion and difficulty. And it's taken a long time to come to accept all that and start to get comfortable with what I do feel I know, what I do know I was shown, and the other parts that it's fuzzy. Okay, I can kind of share that with you, but I wouldn't ask anyone to bet money on it either.
Hmm. Well, yeah, I mean, I have experienced this myself. I'm always trying to check my ego, but there are still different times where you start to build up a thought and you stick with it for a while, and it's not until you observe yourself having that thought you're like, "Oh man, I am doing exactly what I don't want to be doing." And you get to this point where I heard someone say the other day to me, and this one sentence really helped me. And he said, "It's not universal if it's not for everybody." It
Hmm.
can't be a universal principle if everyone can't use it. So how can you
Right.
then change this thought so that everyone can use it? So that in itself, that one little thing,
Mm,
just like I said earlier, when with you when I heard you, like these little things that they build up and they have revelation behind them. They have new
yeah.
meaning, just like these spiritual texts, these religious texts. They mean
Yep.
something to you differently when you experience it. When you put yourself as the
Yep.
character, when I read the Bhagavad Gita and I put myself as Arjun, I'm like, okay, that makes sense. When I'm reading the Gospel of John and I'm putting that's talking about me and
Right.
all of the it doesn't matter really which spiritual practice or religion you
Right.
choose. When you put yourself as the main character, it makes more sense to you, and then you apply it to your life, and it
Right.
it really helps. But that what you said about the ego, it hides as an angel of light, and it stays until it comes to a point where then your spirit is like, do you recognize it? Do you see now that it's not dead, that you can't kill it, because if you kill it, then you don't exist. So you have to somehow, and it's not even merging it; it's somehow getting along with it, but not. That's not even the right word. It's always like this little back and forth that we go through, and can you stay in the spirit longer or long enough to let go of the ego is really like the message I'm getting at now.
Yeah, or you could kind of look at it as like there's an operative function there that does have some use for the body if it can be in its sort of it's not pristine, right? It's not clean or clear, but in its like natural state. So really what you're trying to do is get rid of any attached things. So first it's any type of entities that are attached to the body or the energy field, or maybe there's other people that are still attached to you. They don't like you still from 20 years ago, and they're still they're still sending stuff, or you're still attached to somebody that you haven't let go of, and you're sending energy the other way, and all this is affecting the egoic structure because it's creating this weird energy imbalance. So a big part of it is just working to see first cleaning what you might call the stuff around you. I don't want to sound new agey when I'm saying that, but you're kind of cleaning the stuff around you until you can get to the point where now it's just all you're left with it is what is this egoic thing, whatever it is, and now all you're doing is dissecting it to seeing what's nonsense and doesn't need to be there, and what's something that could be pretty useful. Like it's good if I'm going to try to cross the street and there's no you know walk sign or something, and I'm going to try to dodge traffic. It's good to have an egoic structure to warn me, hey, avoid the bus because it might hurt you when you hit it.
Hmm.
There's certain things that egoic structures can be useful for, but you have to know how much of it is not. Like I say, here I was in the canyon. I'm in an absolute life or death situation. I've got seconds to live. The thing I've trusted my whole life, my thought, wasn't there. So it indicated to me how valuable thought really is.
Hmm. And that also brings up the thought to me when you're saying the bus hits you, and you don't want to do that because it'll hurt you. It also brings up the thought of, well, if you trust that it won't hurt, that you don't go seeking it out, but you trust that you'll be okay no matter what you do, that bus will veer off, that something will happen, that you will be protected. You'll be in this protective bubble that you've created because you don't have fear. But there is a good sense in knowing that you do have limits and you don't want to push your limits because that
Limits. There
fear,
it is.
as soon as that fear creeps in a little bit, when Jesus is telling Peter to walk on water, I don't know if it's Peter actually, but someone's walking on water, and as soon as he has fear, then he falls in.
Right.
As soon as it creeps in a little bit, and it's so difficult to keep it out, that then all of a sudden, boom, you get hit by that bus. It doesn't veer off course.
Yeah, that's the issue when you're dealing when you walk around for a while without having fear. On one hand, it's beautiful because there's no blocking energy, right? You're just living in a very clear, clean, highly charged state. But if you're allowing the egoic structures to sneak in, then you could just do stuff because, well, it doesn't matter what happens to me. Who
Mhm.
cares? Nothing can happen to me. So what difference does it make? And then you do it, and then it's like, oh, well, no, and this is not a good situation now. This was really stupid, you
Mhm.
know. So again, actually, that thought that you were mentioned before, how is this universal? So if when you're in this no fear state, if you also take this, is what I'm doing right now helping, like you say, in a universal way, or is it just trying to help one or two people or one or two things or me or this situation? Then you could get yourself caught, and that's actually a really good little message to have in the back of your head to kind of say, because that will erase some problems right there. Because there's a
Yeah.
lot of things that would say, yeah, it's not universal. So even though it's not a bad thing to do, it's not. It doesn't have complete work to do. So I'll just skip it.
Yeah, yeah, and that brings up the question to me. Like I face this question often. It's like, do I protect myself and go? Do I become a monk and go live in the mountain and just, because I can't deal with this world because it's so
Mm.
crazy, or do I throw in my fishing line and pull people out of the matrix? And it really feels like that you've gone through this as well. That you make videos, great videos. You go on
Mhm.
podcasts and you're reaching in there to try to help people climb out. Is that our goal here, is to pull everyone out of the matrix?
I guess theoretically it is. Probably that's it- probably honestly it's like no one gets out unless everyone gets out, right? It's got to be all or
Yeah.
nothing, I think, kind of thing. First problem, you got two problems with that. Is one, of course, not every human you see is human. I think we're learning that very much from the incredible, crazy situation we're in now. That
Mhm.
how many out there are just, you might as well call them non-player characters. They're just there to populate the world. Um, so you've got that side of it, and then you've got the other side of it. There's not many you can really help anyway. Um, no one can be helped if they don't want it, right? And
Mhm.
that's just gonna. I know a lot of people who try that and they just wind up drained and sick. And so it's where's this point where you I think you, and it doesn't have to be. I mean, a lot of people can have these really deep experiences and just go to the mountains and say that's what's right for me. I'll just stay out there. Maybe one person one time in my whole life will bump out here and find me, and I'll have that conversation, and that's all they need. Others need to maybe for a while do a bit more, but it's more, I guess, from my perspective, is trying to say, like, if I do some of my videos, not all of them, but some of the ones, like when I'm doing my Plato's Cave or my spiritual warfare videos, I know, okay, 5,000 people, 10,000 people watch it, but I know I'm really only going to maybe affect 10.
Mhm.
That there's parts of the conversation that are for just generalized for
Mhm.
everyone, it's universal, and then every little, there's like pieces of it that I only think a few people will hear this, but I put it in anyway for them. And that's kind of how I'm kind of sometimes operating, saying things for everybody and saying a few things for just a few that are ready to hear it.
Right,
I don't
like
want, and again, I don't want to sound that, again, that makes me sound like, oh, I'm special, and and I'm definitely not. I mean, not in any way, shape, or form. I'm very average, and like I say, when I look back at the ancient world, or I remember, my Zen monk, Mr. Park, or the things that the native medicine people could do, they're still, they're levels above whatever I think I'm at, but doesn't mean you don't have something to pass on. Everybody has something that can help somebody else, even if it's just, hey, you stopped drinking last year, you're now 1 year sober. There's somebody out there who's still drinking that would like to maybe stop. You can help them, for example. I mean, there's something you can do for everybody, no matter what situation you find yourself in. You have pieces of information that somebody else can benefit from.
Right. We're all students and we're all teachers. And I think what you were saying with your video reaching 10 people versus 10,000 hearing it is kind of like how I said in the beginning is I felt like my soul was crushed when I heard that. That affected me probably more so than it affected most people. Like I really felt like, wow, like that really, really affected me. So I completely understand what you're saying, but I kind of, did you want to respond?
No, I was just wondering when if you think back to that now, what was the one sort of, or the biggest thing that you sort of say some things got broken, or you've seen through? What was the biggest thing you saw through from it? I'm just
Right,
curious.
and that's what I was leading into next was the
Oh,
World Fair's cover-ups. It was how simple to debunk the mainstream narrative of the World's Fairs, and it really got me thinking, how did we not, as a society, ever question the science, the building structure? How do we not, like, there are so many genius mathematicians, scientists, builders, whatever, you name it, and that really helped me understand that, oh, they just filed these people away through universities, like you were saying, and through being cattle essentially and doing their jobs, and they're geniuses at their jobs. But when they're told that the only way to make a vehicle go is by a combustible engine, then they're taking away every other possibility, and the person cannot think for themselves, and their genius is funneled to this one stream rather than the fullness of creation. So that really, it broke it down
yeah.
for me. So I do.
Mm,
I want to transition into the World's Fairs and what
sure.
is it specifically? Because when people look at it, they say, "Oh, well." When you look at it, was built in 2 years because it was plaster and it was wood, so it was easy building materials to make. What's so weird about that? And some people will say that the photographs that all the people are etched out of it, and the method that they used it, that there's nothing shady about it. And
Yeah.
so as somebody who's coming to it for the first time, what is it specifically about the World's Fairs that makes it so not believable, the mainstream narrative?
Well, first, okay, like show the cover of my book again, because that picture was a one that image was one that really sort of hit me, and that's from the Chicago World's Fair. It's looking out at the court. That's a 65-foot high golden statue in the or giant dome building in the back. Yeah,
Yeah,
and
Columbia, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
the Columbian Exposition, and that was the first one I came across in sort of February of 2019. That's when I had, I grew up in Canada, so there had been World's Fairs. There was one in Montreal in 1967. I wasn't alive for that one. There was one in Vancouver in 2010. I almost went, so I knew about them. We all know there've been these things, but we don't.
Mhm.
Um, and I was studying cathedrals at the time. I'd been in Florence. I was trying to understand how cathedrals were like machines, how these buildings were energetic structures, and what actually was the energy, how was it generated, what was being done with. That's what I was thinking about. And as I was somehow just looking through this, I bumped into some things on the World's Fairs, and I think particularly a video by John Levy. I think he had one specifically. And it just, similar to what happened to you, it kind of happened to me when I was looking at these things. It's like, well, this is wild. And then once I began to realize, and then when they built these things, which like were 700 acres in Chicago, 1,000 acres in St. Louis, 500 acres in Buffalo, they just took dynamite and blew them up. They've these are things that are built in absolutely record time, 700, 1,000 acres built in 2 years with massive buildings, huge structures, lakes, lagoons, fountains, trains running, electrical sidewalks, whatever. And as soon as this thing is done, you just blow it up with dynamite and chuck it in the garbage.
Mhm.
I knew something was just wrong with this. And it just, as I began digging into them, every single one became stranger and stranger and stranger and stranger. So that was kind of how I began researching it, and I mean, eventually I had to just stop because I thought I had enough for a book. I could just keep going for 20 years because it was so, every time you look into something new, it's something bizarrely strange. So I'll just give this overview and then you can take your questions where you want. So yeah, the standard story, for example, like of the Chicago Exposition, is that they began their planning in early 1891. They took it took about a month to plan it, and then they started building it 3 months later. 700 acres, took them less than 2 years. That's the story. We're talking, I think it's about 250 buildings that were there. One of the buildings, the manufacturer's building, you could put 300,000 people in there. So you take three
College football
Rose Bowl,
stadiums.
yeah, three Rose Bowls, and that's how many people you could get into this place. That's one building, right? And yeah, the story of why this is supposed to have been done is because they claimed that all the buildings are built out of something called staff, which was it's just basically wood and plaster, kind of like what you'd have on a movie set. The difference is a movie set is meant to just stand in the background and the actors are in front of it. It's just like a facade, right? These things are not only being used, they're being used with 10, 20, 30,000 people in them. All of these buildings were loaded with the technology of the day, artwork, statues, anything that almost you can name. There were elevators that went to the top of most of these buildings, so you could go to the top and look out over the fairs. You're not going to build a 315-foot Buffalo Electric Tower and have elevators taking people to the top out of wood and plaster.
Right.
Like,
Who would get on that? Yeah.
Yeah. No. So that took me then to the questioning of, and now I have to say I've got a third option that I'm going to throw in here that we can all talk about, because there's 50 explanations when you start to say they couldn't have done this in 2 years. I went and saw building contractors and they were very clear. That's impossible to do. Even if the story is true that they really did use plaster and wood for everything, 2 years is still impossible for the scope of what was being built. But I came to two conclusions. It was either one, they had a technology that they're not supposed to have and was somehow lost, that they did build these in 2 years actually, but with a technology they're not supposed to have, and we maybe don't even have now. Two was that a number of the buildings, particularly the large ones, were part of an ancient civilization that was at the same sort of time as Greece and Rome. This word Tartaria throws in. I don't like to use the word, but I just call it like a worldwide similar looking civilization that was refound, cleaned up. New buildings were put around it. They did build some structures around it to make the fair and move on. Then the third, I'll get to the third later. We can get to the one that's new in my head. But what people need to understand is these fairs were, what made it most important to me was they relate to where we are now, because I was using the word reset in the book before that word ever came out from the World Economic Forum. Because to me, this was like whatever had happened, a huge amount of the world's population had been killed off. And these world fairs were like the starting point of the new world. The world we've known our whole life was generated at these fairs, was created at these fairs, because the midway exhibits and the explanations of history and science and the human zoos of showing the primitives off to the Victorian elite who were at the fairs. This was all like a giant propaganda indoctrination before television, before movies, before radio, where you could get, because these things happen all over the world. I mean, you go to the Philippines, they had a World's Fair. You go to Buenos Aires, they got a World's Fair. You go to Cambodia, they got a World's Fair. You go to Japan, they got a World's Fair. You go to everywhere in Europe, they got a World's Fair. So everywhere in the world is having them at the same time, building these massive things, destroying them. But I think part of the thing is there's a message, there's an underlying message that they're placing into the minds of human beings, and it only takes a generation once the teachers who've been to the World's Fair start teaching the students, and all of a sudden we have an unquestioned reality.
Yeah, and Michelle Gibson also says the same thing, that she thinks that the 1850, it wasn't the first World's Fair, 1850, but it was maybe a couple years before that. But she's like, that's like the starting point of the reset. That is the starting point of the indoctrination. I say it myself often that the human zoos, they tell us that these people of color were savages and they dress like this and this is how they lived. And in my mind, when I'm thinking, okay, if that was true, they had these human zoos, which it is true that at least in the mainstream narrative, they tell us that there were human zoos. Okay, could they have tricked an entire population of people living somewhere and said, "This is how you act, and we will supply you food and housing and whatever," and then they teach their kids, "This is how we live," and then they never come back, and then that's just how everyone's living now, and they think that that's their ancestry, that this is how we've always lived, but maybe they were actually living in structures, and the Amazon we know is as it's being killed off, that there was civilization under it, that that they weren't just living in jungles as we think. They're not just living in the wild, moving from place to place without houses, that they're living in little huts and all of the things that we think. Now, was that happening? Probably somewhat, but on the massive scale that they tell us that, oh, it's only white people that brought civilization together, that everyone else was just running around in madness. I mean, it's super racist, these World's Fairs, and everything, like almost every facet of it. It is an extremely racist thing. And when you start saying that to people who have been to World's Fairs, I had a guest on way earlier in my series or in my podcast where I said, "Are you familiar with the World's Fairs?" Because she's saying she's a history buff, and she's like, "Oh yes, I've been to one, and they were wonderful, and this and that." And I was like, "Oh yeah, do you know that was cover up for the civilization that existed before?" And she did not like it. She was not very happy because she was of the mindset that, oh no, history's true. So uh, it gets into this weird place where they really did a number on the citizens of the world. As you're saying, they had them all over the place, and there were these great fires that happened 5 to 10 years, maybe even 20 years before. And when I ask people, I'm like, "Okay, if you're going to have a World's Fair in Chicago, or not Chicago, because I think that was just after, but if you're gonna have a World's Fair somewhere a few years after a major fire, why then destroy all the architecture?" They say, "Oh, to drum up tours, to bring in money." And they lost millions of dollars. All of these World's Fairs lost millions of dollars, and they were expensive to the people at the time, and only the people who were in university or school or whatever, the upper class, could attend these to afford to travel to them, afford to pay for the tickets to get there, and then they would be the ones then teaching everything. There's so much that goes on. We barely scratch the surface of anything really, and there's hole after hole after hole. And if when we build narratives, exactly, it's the people that tell the story over and over in the mainstream story are the ones that get heard. And uh, so we're at a place where the people who are at the top, the rich, they are the ones who are telling everyone else, "Oh, this is what's happening over there," and then everyone else just goes along with it.
You've obviously read my book very carefully. I could send you to do the podcast for me on this subject. Actually, this is you're saying. I mean, it's like sounds fantastic. I'll give you an example. This wasn't in my book. This was from a jeweler from Senegal who was part of the human zoo there said about the 1889 Paris exposition. He said, "We are very humiliated to be exhibited in this way, in huts like savages. These straw and mud huts do not give an idea of Senegal. In Senegal, we have large buildings, railroad stations, railroads. We light them with electricity. The Bureau of Hygiene does not tolerate the construction of this type of hovel. Ones that fall into disrepair like this are not replaced." So, I mean, even the ones that are there, in a sense, having to be like actors, knew they were actors and knew what they were doing. The Smithsonian had an exhibit that started, I think, in Nashville, and they had a series of skulls in this display of like And all the skulls were very, very small. And then there'd also be criminal skulls from all over the world. And then there would be one sort of Victorian English skull. And then what they would do is they would measure your head. And then based on the size of your head, they would show you where on the evolutionary scale you were. Are you in a savage land? Are you in a criminal? Or are you actually a proper English person? These are the kind of things that are going on at the fair.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one side that's happening of the sort of indoctrination. You've got the second side that's going on are these, let's call them interactive historical events, right? Like when you go through, in my book, I mean, I could do it for all of them, but I just did it for St. Louis. And I talked about what was on the pike on their sort of midway ground. You could go, they wound up getting, I think it was 40,000 actors total to be able to house things like, they had ancient Rome where you could go see gladiators fight. You could go see, Roman Senate things happen. You could talk to the gladiators after. The streets of Jerusalem, they built 22 streets from the city of Jerusalem, including all of the main sites. They brought over 2,000 people from Jerusalem to man the exhibits. You had a Bavarian Alps area. You had a streets of old Paris. You had a Siberian railroad through Russia. You had like a Barcelona exhibit. So what they're doing is not just giving you some historical stuff on a wall that you can look at. They're giving it to you almost like TV, right? Like a movie, and you're interactive with it. You're not just sitting there, you're talking to them. You're almost like you're part of the show. So think of the incredible not propaganda, what's the word? Brainwashing that would be going on from something like that. People would really believe, oh yeah, I've been to ancient Rome now. I know what was going on in the Colosseum. I just saw it at the World's Fair.
Right.
What?
Right. It's like the mind plays tricks on us that
Yeah.
when we're watching TV, we put ourselves in the situation. But imagine being actually there.
Yeah.
It's so much more intoxicating. They're giving you
Yeah.
the essences of feeling like you're actually there. It's quite incredible how
Right.
this level of this is some top level stuff here that we're talking about
Right.
of changing the narrative.
Right, and so you're dealing with that, and then like you say, so all of these cities have gone through a fire. Like every city in North America has this giant fire that burns down like the whole city, and then it magically starts rebuilding itself again, just like the fairs in a year or two. Then they have the fair, like you say, and then blow it up. Like San Francisco is a great one. They supposedly put the fair where a whole bunch of homeless people were sleeping. So homeless people, they got no place to live. They build the giant fair. Do they keep any of the buildings for any reason to house any of these supposed homeless people from the earthquake? No, they just tear the whole
Burn
thing
it
down.
Yep.
Yeah, which is of course the most unlogical thing you would do. That would just make sense. You need houses, so let's use them once and then keep them, and then we're dealing with the time frame of these fairs are right in the same period of first we have these strange photographs of major cities all over the world with no people, no horses, no nothing, right? Like literally you have all these photos of these deserted cities. You're dealing with these orphan trains where particularly in the United States, you have all of these young children coming from who knows where. Nobody can explain where their parents are, why there's 50,000 kids being placed on trains and moved out west to cities. And you've got these massive insane asylums being built, which are just giant. I mean, they're bigger than they're like bigger than Medici palaces in Florence. These things are huge and beautiful and ornate, and they're everywhere. And like, how many insane people do you all of a sudden have in the 1880s to need these insane asylums? But it starts to make sense. Like you say, if you're saying, if this is the coming out of a reset, if you have just wiped out a huge amount of the population, particularly the adult population, well, you want a child population then, because children will be they'll be frightened because they won't know what's going on. So they'll do whatever they're told. They won't have any personal experience. They'll believe whatever they're told. And anybody who might still remember the past and won't go along with the new story, they just go to the insane asylum and we get rid of them. And lo and behold, in a generation, we've got a story that we want to tell. And I think it's important because so much of what I'm, and it's all speculation, right? I can't prove any of this, right? I can't make very clear when it comes to history, you can't prove that anything. All you can do is tear apart the narrative and say the narrative is probably wrong. Here are some other theories that take into account what we're
Right.
dealing with, what we know of from that period. That's really all we can do. So I'm not trying to tell anybody I have the answers and you should listen to me as if I'm, know everything. I don't. I'm just presenting theories.
Well, and
But
you're using their own
Yeah.
theory or their own stories
Yeah.
against them.
Right.
Orphan trains, infantoriums is another thing.
Yeah.
You know.
But here we are. Here we are in the same situation. We could have taken photographs of empty cities, in the last few years. We've got this weird thing going on where we don't know what the population is going to look like in a couple of years, or what it's going to be like, or what the health is going to be like of the population, or who's going to be around or not be around. Or so to me, once this situation started in 2020, I sort of looked at my book again and kind of like, holy cow, like, am I seeing are we going through this again? And then I started thinking, what's going to be the World Fairs next? What will be the next, if and when this ends, and if it goes bad, if it goes really, really bad for humans, what'll be the new World's
metaverse.
Fairs? Yeah, and that's exactly what I just thought. And that takes me back to the third topic that I had for this.
Okay.
What if the metaverse started? We're in an equivalent metaverse now. We, in a sense, the same thing that could be happening to us, or those who will go forward with this, happen to us. And and at least the ones who first started at World Fairs time, that was their indoctrination. So these fairs, in a sense, weren't actually built, nor maybe were they dug out of the ground. They were like programmed in. They were literally just part of the indoctrination system that was set up to first bring the new group into this virtual world, to get everyone thinking the way you want them to think in the reality. It's, again, just a theory, but I don't know. I have to another thing I have to put as that's maybe.
Yeah, and what you're saying with the orphan trains, I mean, they said there was a neighborhood in New York City where 30,000 children were living. Just 30,000
Right.
children and no adults. What are they, just playing stickball all day? I mean, how are these children surviving? Then someone, of course, I think it was the Methodist Church, but it was the Christian church anyway, that came up with the idea of sending these children here. And when I really start to think about things, this reset, when I see the Carrington event, 1859, when I see the War of 1812, the World War Zero, if you will, the New Madrid earthquake in 1812, the Year Without a Summer, 1816, when I start to see all the pestilence and all the famines that were going on, that was all biblical. That the second destruction of the world, according to fire, happened already, and it happened in that time period. And I think, to my best ability, and of course this is just speculation, I think it was the rapture, that they replaced us with these infantoriums, and were able to make test tube babies, and they made a lot of test tube babies, and that a lot of the parents were then raptured away, maybe, or taken into insane asylums, because they didn't want them to tell everybody what happened. And that we're at a time period where we're coming up on the final judgment. I just wrote this piece. I'm not a writer by any means, but I just wrote the most prolific thing that I've ever written. It was only 9 pages on Microsoft Word, 6,000 words, but it was asking the question, what is a Tartarian? Because Tartaria is this umbrella term that's describing all of these different things that, orphan trains, infantoriums, World's Fairs, so many things, Anatoly Fomenko, they all like come into here. But why do we call it Tartaria? And I break it down, and I say, what is the cover up? Because when we look at this, why is the architecture all there? The cover up to me is that, if I'm going off of a biblical timeline, that the millennial kingdom has happened, the 1,000-year reign of Christ on earth has happened, the 1,000 years that Satan will be bound in the pit and that humanity would just have to deal with its own stuff has happened, and that we're in the section that we're just beyond that just finished not too long ago, and now we're in the short season where Satan is here, and it's the age of deception. He's going to confuse all of the nations, and maybe these are some terms that some people don't like or don't relate to or whatever, but in my mind, this is how I put it together, that this is the story, and we're told by mainstream history and by the church especially that we've been 2,000 years since Jesus and nothing has occurred. But once you start to get into all these different topics, well, maybe it's not 2,000 years, and maybe it's only 1,000 years, and maybe things have really occurred, and it's exactly on the biblical timeline, but we're just told that we're somewhere else in the timelines to think that we're more separated from God than we really are. What's your take on that? Have you come across the millennial
Yep.
kingdom?
Oh yeah. I first came across it through a guy, Conspiracy R Us
Yeah,
on
he's great. Yeah.
YouTube. Yeah, isn't he? Great researcher, actually. And it was the first time I had thought about it as, I mean, I knew about the
The concept.
story and the idea, concept, but I hadn't really put it together. Well, wait a minute. And then he put it, I think, in his video. He was claiming that the Christ figure in the last 1,000 years was Saint George.
Hmm.
But that Saint George, all these images of Saint George in every church defeating the dragon, of course, is the controlling of this energy during this 1,000-year period. Because one thing for certain, when you go into certain cathedrals, and not all of them, there are many older cathedrals that you go into that just have a junky energy, but some of the ones that are still clean, like when you go to Chartres or you go to some of these other ones, it's the same as being in the pyramids in Egypt almost. The energy is strong and clear and balanced and harmonious, and you have to just start wondering if you've got a society living with these kind of buildings, these kind of structures, where literally it's generating a harmonious energy just from the building, from the architecture itself. Maybe you didn't need doctors, for example, because people didn't get sick. Maybe you didn't need certain things because it wasn't required. That people were living in quite a
Hmm.
real balanced way. And, it's a nice thought, but the buildings tell me this is really possible because of how clear they still are even today. Even though so many things are missing and they're not being used like they used to be, a lot of that energy still exists. So that is a possible theory. I can't, again, I can't say that some of this stuff is wrong, because there is evidence that you could say it could be, and it's
Hmm.
all things that I think should be put on the table.
Hmm.
It's like I just finished my Southern France series, and I speculated that perhaps the whole New Testament took place in France, and maybe took place thousands of years before it's supposed to have happened. That's also a possibility. And I think these particular stories, and it doesn't matter which religious story you get into, there's no matter what, there's a lot of it's become falsified and has been changed and rewritten and
Hmm.
just hidden. But there's underlying truths in all of it.
Right.
And if you can sort of dig through, same thing, if you can dig through the false, recognize it's not all true. So what's true and what's false, if you sort of take that in your mindset and begin separating it, well, once you find out the true parts of it, then you can dig in and go into depth on those parts, and you can avoid the rest. And then I think these texts bring up these kind of knowledge. So
Right.
that is a possibility. And so the question becomes, okay, if that's true, if what you just said is true, that we're now in the other 1,000 years, I guess, or I can remember how many
The
years
short
it is on the other
season.
side of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. The question becomes, well, what do we do? Because normally they're still waiting. Jesus is still coming, right? So you don't even have to worry about the period now, because that's way in the future. You get ready for the rapture first, right?
Mhm.
We get ready for the uh, the calm period first. We didn't get a lot of information on what to do if you happen to show up and that period's gone,
Right.
and you're going to be in the craziness. What's the best way to handle the craziness and keep your clarity and your spiritualness with you? And maybe that's what we're all trying to do as a group. Those of us that on some level have figured it out in our own way, we're just sharing with other people how to deal with insanity.
Right. I'll have to check out your series on South France, and I
Mm.
really think that everything is a fractal nature that's happening on larger and smaller scales, so that it's happening repeatedly in different places, and that's why I think there has to
Mm.
be a beginning and an end, because there has to be one event for all of humanity to experience together. because like we're all our own main character of our story, but I think that
Yeah.
there is one main character for all of history. And it's interesting, I haven't come across the St.
Mm-mm.
George thing. I will have to look that up. But are you
Mhm.
familiar with the suffix ia, meaning kingdom of? So when you say St. George, I'm in Georgia, so the kingdom of George, and there is
Right.
actually a land or a area here called King's Land, and St. George is there, and St. Mary's is there, and it's like,
Mhm.
whoa, wait a second, what's going on? The devil went down to Georgia, the kingdom of George. There's a very wild speculative thing that goes on in my mind,
Right.
like, okay, what
Yeah.
exactly is this all connected, or am I just making this up?
Right. Because the story, of course, of Saint George and the Dragon is actually unbelievably symbolically powerful. Right. There's so many layers and teachings in that. Yeah. And he was sort of saying that that became the code word that in his presentation, that this Jesus's return was hidden with this name in
Hmm.
text going forward, so that
I'll have to look into that.
you could get the story in without getting the books burned.
Have you seen in Japan they depict who I forget who exactly it was, some figure in America, maybe like Thomas Jefferson or somebody like that, that they depict him as slaying dragons, that he's actually with
Yeah.
swords slaying dragons. And when
Right.
you find out that America is America, which is the land of the serpent, that the Africans actually named it that they came over from Africa, and that's where you know, these copper colored, as it's described in many ancient cultures, copper colored people came from. Some came from India, traveled over the Bering Strait or through boat, and then vice versa. Also, Africans came from Africa across the
Right.
Atlantic in boat. There's, and then you get to the Moorish people, the Turkish Ottoman Empire. I have recently come across the idea that maybe America is Israel, Babylon, and Egypt was all within America at some point. And then I come across this meme yesterday that's showing the Sphinx and the pyramids, and it says, if these are so old, right, and they're so uh, present in everything that we know of in that area at that time, then why isn't it mentioned in the Bible at all? Why are there's no mention of the Sphinx or the pyramids? What was, that we're told Israel 70 years ago was in the Middle East, but was it in the middle of America? And oh wait, the Mormons actually believe that Eden was in Missouri, which is the center of America, where the New Madrid earthquake took place that was so strong it reversed the Mississippi River. That seems pretty biblical to me. So is Israel actually America?
Yeah, I mean, all I've been able to figure out, like I say, I mean, when I started my Southern France research, I got enough to start saying, I think maybe I've got the connection, but that doesn't mean the connection can't be all sorts of things. I just knew something intuitively told me the placement of the story is wrong, right?
Mm,
I'm not necessarily attacking potentially some of the actual information in the book, but I felt the location has been purposely hidden in
right.
order to hide wherever these things really took place. Because if you could find the actual spot that these events took place, be they, the place of Golgotha, the place of this place, then if you were actually on the exact location of it, the you would be connecting with the energy completely, as opposed to connecting someplace you think you're at, and you'll never fully be, as centered as you could be if you knew the spot. And I
Right.
think a lot of this misdirection is just to hide the real spots. But but I don't call them controllers anymore. I call them influencers, right? The people that are the beings or whatever that are running the show. They know where all these spots are. And so who knows? The Georgia Guidestones are in a really weird place to even be placed and have them there. So the question is, why are they there? Like I say, why have they got them in Georgia? Why have they got them on that exact spot? It's marking something,
Hmm.
not just what's on them. It's marking a spot, for example. What's the spot they're really marking?
Well, it's interesting
Makes your question.
you bring them up because I'm in a Facebook group and somebody posted something about their depopulation program. Conspiracy theorists are crazy because their depopulation program, it's not like it's written down in stone or something. And and they have a picture of the Georgia Guidestones, and it's a great meme. But when I look at it, so I went there on the 4th of July, this past 4th of July,
Right.
and Mimi and I, we were the only ones there in the morning sun. We watched the sunrise. I meditated during it, and
Yeah.
I'm an energy reader. I do mentorship programs. I meditate with people, and I read energy. So we're there, and we're just like searching the area this whole weekend, and we find out that, and I did a little study before we went there, obviously, and the Native Americans called that the center of the earth. And I was like, oh, that's very weird. And I find out that the Sunni Muslims think that that is going to be the center of the earth once the poles shift. And I'm like, huh.
And they have that time capsule there, but there's no
Yeah,
start date to
yeah.
it. There's a capsule like ready to be filled, but
Right.
there's no start date as to when anything was put in
Right.
it.
And I meditate on top of it, and I couldn't pick up
Huh.
that there was any energy under there. So my idea is that they built that because that's going to be the center of the world, because they know there's a coming cataclysm, and they're actually pretty decent rules to live by. Maybe not the 500 million people, obviously you could fit that in like Alaska, and everybody could have like a ton of acres, and it would be like no
Right.
problem at all. But to me, that's like you're just saying, why is it in that spot? Well, it's on a very high location. And the way the streets are laid out, it's on the corners of streets, Route 17, 72, and 77, and it's in the shape of a cross, actually the Methodist Church cross, how it has the little
Mhm.
flag. It's at mile marker 17.72 on Route 17/72. There's all this stuff there. 72 is a symbolic that's the amount of demons in biblical terms. That's also the amount of names that God has according to the Bible.
The number of conspirators who killed Osiris.
Okay, yeah, I didn't know that. That's
Yeah.
interesting. Yeah, so there's so many different things, and obviously 77 is symbolic, sevens. So there's so many different things built into that location. But the two big things for me was the Native Americans think that that's the center of the earth, and the Sunni Muslims, and it's also so the way that even it's connected to the Sunni Muslims is that it has the same dimensions built in that as something they just built over somewhere in the Middle East, that there's some kind of structure that's built with the same dimensions in a different manner, but I forget exactly how it says. But those two cultures aren't like conspiracy theories. Native Americans and Sunni Muslims, when they have this idea that that's the center of the earth once the poles shift, or that it to the Native Americans it used to be that, to the Sunni Muslims it's going to be the center of the earth. That really gives me pause into what these things stand for and why they would have all these different languages there, because I think everyone's going to congregate there. Maybe it's going to be the only place left that's not covered in water or
Now
something.
they kind of distract you with a different plaque somewhere else a few miles away that says this is the center of the
it's like
earth.
2-3 miles
This is
away.
where people came to trade things.
Yeah.
So they don't tell you at
Right.
the guidestones that it's the center. They kind of point you somewhere else and
Yeah.
say this is the center. Come see this.
Yeah, and they say that so it's only like a few miles away, but they say that they call it the center of the earth because that's where they used to meet from Florida to Maine. That's where they would trade at, but that's not the center. No, that's nowhere close to the center of the East Coast. So it's just ridiculous.
No, but I know from the study of ancient cultures myself. I mean, most ancient cultures have a part of their own area where they call like the navel of the world, or the center
Mhm.
of the world, right? Everybody has this.
Here we go.
Yeah, so it doesn't matter whether you're on Easter Island or whether you're in Peru or whatever you're in. There's a place that this is considered the navel, the center. So to me, I feel like there are different centers of the earth, you might say, depending on, well, let's call them different energetic centers. Let's put it that way.
Okay.
That each one is a center of the earth, but just like it's a different
Like a
chakra.
yeah.
So yeah. So each one has its own.
Meridian
So
point.
yeah. So my guess is there's maybe like, and there's probably more than 7. My guess is there might be 15 or 24 or whatever. There will be a set number of them that used to be in the world, and each one is considered like not just the center of the earth, but considered like like an actual earth chakra that was their responsibility to look after, to
I'm
make sure
getting like
that it
a
was.
I'm picking up on like a ding 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 ding. You know, like you hit it when you said 15. It's going off in my head right now. You know,
Okay.
my psychic capabilities. That's an incredible little mystery that we're kind of uncovering here.
Yeah.
Wow. So this has been a great conversation. I mean, we touched on a lot of different things. Was there anything else that we didn't get into that you wanted to bring up?
Well, no, I mean, I'm here kind of for you guys. So I don't know. You got your, your friends are with you. Did she have anything she wanted to ask? Because she didn't get a question in, so I want to make sure.
I'm really listening, and I just, when you said navel, that word has been popping up in my world in the
Navy.
past week.
Mm.
And I like to follow all those clues that I'm being given for me. So I'm just interested in this naval thing
We were
now.
talking
I
about
was
this
just
morning.
thinking to myself, is Georgia the navel for technically for like us, and Pennsylvania being the
Yeah.
head of where, that's where we came from. So is Georgia, the navel for us?
Yeah,
You know,
could be.
I
Yeah,
just have thoughts going on.
yeah.
Mm. Because I know like Delphi was considered a navel in the Greek world, right? There's a specific stone on Easter Island that was the navel. I know that I think there's one in Cusco that's a navel. There's a weird stone that appeared at Rennes-les-Bains in southern France that no one could explain what it was or why it was there. So you went, okay, is that a navel? Egypt would have had the Benben stone, right? So you have
Right.
there doesn't make it, it's not surprising that there should be ones in different parts of the world, different sections that sort of that's the center where it radiates out. And what's really sorry, it just came to mind as we're talking about ancient cultures, and now you're talking about Georgia and mound builders and whatever else. I found out recently that I didn't know that the St. Louis World's Fair, which is now at was a place called Jackson Park. Forest Park. I confused that one with Chicago. Anyway, it was the equivalent of Cahokia on the other side of the river. So Cahokia, so you've got Cahokia on one side, which are these mounds, and then they have these photographs of before the World's Fair, all these giant mounds that are in this area that I guess they just bulldozed. That's what they claim. They bulldozed them and then built the fair on top of them. Or maybe they dug some of them out, and that's what was it. We don't, always all you see is a mound. You don't know what's under them. So first you've got that issue, and then I got we'll call it a mysterious kind of email that was kind of suggesting that actually Cahokia is a fake site. It's it was where the World's Fair was, or a long time ago, and then they moved it. They
Wow.
literally rebuilt it in the Cahokia where you think it is, but that's not where it really was. It was really where the fair was, and that which is interesting. I've never been to Cahokia, so I've never had a chance to read the energy there. But after I've done now this research and got this information, I'd be curious to see, is Cahokia an energy site or is it like a dead site? Because if it's a dead site, that would now indicate, oh, it's moved.
Yeah.
They've moved it on us.
Just the sound of the word itself just reminds me of hoax. I just keep thinking hoax. When you say it, that's what I hear.
Yeah, when we were talking about the energy, when I went to Georgia Godstones, it was such a high vibrational energy. I almost had to pull over. I felt so high when I'm driving there, and you're going up and downhill, so there's a little of that to it. But I was like zooming, like I am in a spot that every single house had a huge cross, like 3-4 feet tall. And like I said, the layout of the streets from the hotel that I stayed at.
Feet tall? They had 3 feet tall crosses?
Yeah, it
in the
was
front
like
of their
everybody's
yards.
yard had a wooden cross in it.
Yeah, all of them.
Not all of them, but like,
Really?
Just about
all the
all of
ones we
them.
saw.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a lot.
Yeah.
I would have loved to have stopped and asked why.
Well,
That's not a normal thing to see. So why
Right,
there?
and it wasn't Christmas and it wasn't Easter,
Right,
so it
it's
was like,
4th of
all right, what are
July.
these crosses permanently on everybody just has them out.
And if you go to Google Earth, so the way that the streets are laid out, like I was saying, Route 17 and 72 are the same road, and then the cross street is Route 77. So from the hotel that we stayed at, which was the only hotel in town, to the Guidestones, is like the long way for the cross. 77 crosses like right up here, and then there's this route called like MLK Jr. that loops down like a Methodist cross has the flag, and it loops down from the side all the way down, and it's like nothing's on that back road, but it just loops that way. Why would they build it that way unless they're representing? So if you go on Google Earth and look down at it,
I'm actually on it right now as you're talking to me. Okay, so I've got Route 77. I've got where the guide stones are. Yeah. So
it's the Eldridge
what's
Hotel. So it's just above 77. That it's like the center of town right there.
Courthouse there or something.
Yeah.
they got a thing called Big Church Road. There's the Bio Church, Cokesbury Highway. So I'm going further up, I guess. So
I mean,
yeah.
it's right there at 77. Like it's only like 2 blocks.
So
or
I'm just saying, like, what street had all these crosses on it? Because then obviously I can just drop down on Google Earth and see them.
17/72. Yeah, I mean, basically everywhere when we were around there. But yeah, 17/72.
It
There
was
was
probably the street we drove the most. Yeah.
yeah. There were big crosses like
The
everywhere.
main roads. Yeah. We
Mhm.
didn't really go on any side roads, so it was most of the main road houses.
Yeah,
Because that's I don't think that's by accident.
yeah.
That's like, for example, there's I find a lot of stone circles out here in Norway where I live. I found like 80 or 100 of them. The local population's kind of forgotten about them, but they're all over the place. But a few people still remember. And there's a small town in southern Norway. I'm not gonna say which one it is, but they've got 2 stone circles that are kind of open for the public, and then they've got 5 more that are kind of very well, we'll call them protected by the local population, that even when I would go and walk around, people would want to come and ask, like, who are you? Why are you here? Why, I'd have to explain why and all of the street names in that part of the town are all named after the Greek or the Norwegian gods. So like Odin Street, Thor Street, Loki Street. And so, and that's not by accident. These stones have been known for a long period of time when they were originally naming the streets, and they knew what they were really connected to, and they knew what the energy was. So it's not by accident that the two go together. So now when you're talking about what's around the Georgia Guidestones and that people are putting crosses on the ground, that is, I would first like to know, how long have they been there? Like, has it been 5 years, 10 years? Have they been doing this for like 100 years? Is this
Well, this is like their lawns. This is
like regular house lawns.
Yeah, that's, I mean, like, I'm wondering how long they've been there. How long has
Yeah.
this tradition been going on
Yeah.
having something like this and this big on your lawn? Because if it goes back many years and people kind of, we've kind of always done this here, it's just part of our culture almost. Then it's saying, what's it marking? What do the old,
there's a reason
the
for
ones,
it.
what's the original start of this? Is it telling us, is that giving us a piece of information that, one of those hidden in plain, a secret in plain sight, hidden in plain sight kind of thing so I'm really wondering what the message could really be. Because as soon as you said that, something told me it's actually a message. It's actually a message.
It's interesting that you say, people would ask you, what are you doing here? As a protection type of thing for that area. When you had that experience that you had, Todd, when people remember those motorcycle people showed up?
Oh, yeah.
When we were there, it was very odd.
So I can tell you this little story. So when I'm going there, I contacted people because I had my podcast going already, and I contacted people that I had on the show and that I followed on Twitter and whatnot that were spiritual people, and I'm like, hey, I'm going to do this mass meditation, and I put it out there that I'm going to do this mass meditation at this time. And what happens is 5 minutes before that time, there's like a couple families there, there's not many people, and I'm getting prepared to do it. And all of a sudden, about 24 people on motorcycles show up, super loud, super obnoxious, and I get this bad feeling, and I'm like, we gotta go. We shouldn't be here right now. So then we leave, right? And as we leave, I overhear people saying, "Oh, that's all it took," and they start laughing. And then, so when we're driving back to the hotel, there was a motorcycle following us there. So there was an SUV behind us. I don't know that the motorcycle was actually like following us, but there was an SUV behind us and a motorcycle behind that. And it's like if this guy was following us, he was like, he made sure that we went back to to not be there, because what the actually, when I was saying the Sunni Muslims, they have
Mhm.
their part of their history or whatever is that someone, the quote unquote antichrist, is the Freemasonic antichrist, is going to go to that location and is going to cause the poles to shift. So I don't know if that has anything to do with it, if they were looking at me upon that way, but I very much felt like they were sent there because I overheard them saying, "Oh, we only live 20 minutes away and we've never been here." But they were super obnoxious. This one woman, she was like sending me these thoughts saying, "If you really are psychic, then you'll leave here now." And that's what made me get up, and I was like, I'm going," because Mimi had already went to the car. It was super hot that day and we're just sitting in the sun. So it was a very strange occurrence for sure that happened.
Yeah.
That
So
that
that's
spot.
very odd that he said that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Interesting.
Yeah.
yeah. There's obviously there's a lot going on at that site and that whole. Now you're telling me the whole area.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
And the date,
And
it
the
was
whole granite
it was
thing.
Route 72, and we
Yeah.
went on 7/2 was the day that we showed up, July 2nd, which was just happenstance, and was 7/3 was the day that happened. But I have one more question that popped up in my mind for you.
sure.
I heard you say before that the statues, you felt like the statues were kind of alive, and I've been playing with this idea that maybe these, I think that the second destruction of the world happened already by fire, as I was saying. And I realize when I look at all these different rock formations that they look like larger people, that the way that I understand things, the fractal nature, that everything used to be much larger. And if fire happened, then everything would then suck out oxygen, making things smaller and smaller over time. So if there was a flash heating process followed by a flash freezing process, then some things would be turned into rock immediately, and maybe spirits of these living beings were trapped inside these rocks. And that could be that how statues even got started is because it was their quote unquote lowercase g gods were there, and then all of a sudden, because we went lower dimensionally because of the oxygen being depleted, that then all of a sudden they're just frozen in place following this freezing process.
Also odd that Elberton is the granite capital of the world, which is,
Yeah.
rock.
And where does rock come from?
Right.
Well, what I can know, share, of course, is just my own experiences with these things. But I've found that first of all, like any ancient statue, if you take these ancient Egyptian, the Old Kingdom statues, I mean, the perfection of the stonework is so perfect. I mean, we're talking about granite and diorite, and it's like smooth as glass. There's not an imperfection, and it's perfect, perfect geometric design on both sides. So, like normally, even today, with high useful tools, you get a little bit of distortion, like an eye might be a millimeter down from the other eye. These ones are in perfect symmetry, like exact. So you've got this first, how the hell did they do this? Even with modern tools, how do you do this? And then, yeah, I've had experiences where people have been like sick, and I've had them touch one of these statues, and the problem goes away.
Wow.
Just from that happened with I find statues of Sekhmet are some of the best for that one, the lion goddess. That I had someone with a really bad back at a museum exhibit, and so I had him sneak behind the Sekhmet statue with me and put his hand on the statue. There's no glass or anything at this thing, and they could put their hand up. We just stood there for 5 minutes, and when he was done, his back was fine. He had no problem continue walking with us. And I've had experiences like that, and then others where, like I say, I've seen like the statue breathing and the statue like actually like alive. And then I began to realize that these are not just statues. These are holders of a particular kind of energy or a particular kind of frequency, or like you even say, the essence of that thing that they're calling a god, but the essence of that, we'll call it, in Egypt, they call them Neturu, so like a force of nature rather than a god. So that force, a little bit of that force of nature is in the statue. So when you're actually, if you can touch or connect with the statue, you're connecting with that force of nature which is of course not external to you, it's within, right? Everything is within. So you're really just animating that thing that is inside of yourself, and that's really what they're there to do. And once I
Wow.
understood that, it's like, okay, these things are on another level than what I thought of, than just high perfection geometric shapes to look a particular way. They actually have a life force in them. And I found similar things now in various like Renaissance statues in Italy. I've seen similar things with Buddhist statues, particularly wooden Buddhist statues. I find more than stone ones. They have this powerful life force. So again, imagine having one of these in your house,
Right.
and you happen to not be feeling well one day. You
Go
just
touch it.
sit with the statue.
Yeah. Well, I gotta tell you, my friend, this is a powerful conversation. I think it'll really open up some minds. If anyone comes here with a closed mind, I think that their mind will be opened to a new way of thinking. Do you want to let the audience know where they can find you?
Sure. For now, I'm still on YouTube, amazingly. So Howdie Mickoski Talks is still running there. Um, you can catch, if you go over to Amazon and use my name, you can at least see the three books that I have up. You don't have to, of course, if you want to buy one, you don't have to buy them from Amazon, but at least it's a place you can track them as to what they are and what they're about. I've got a really bad named website of Egyptian-wisdom-revealed.com. I don't have much there, just links to a few other things, but generally the YouTube channel or like an Amazon place is a good starting point if you want to look into stuff, and then you can get emails and if you need to from there and go from there. I've enjoyed the conversation. You guys have been because it was interesting, because originally I wasn't sure about doing it
Right.
as we were discussing, and just so you know, he sent a really honestly a really honest, clear email back to me, and it was just so clear and clean that it was just like there was now no discussion in my mind. Yes, I'm going to be happy to do a conversation with this person, and so sometimes we all just need that little bit extra. So just a reminder too, that if someone else for some reason, well, I don't know, I've got this going on, I'm busy, and if you speak to them with the same clear way that you spoke back to me, you'll get anybody who might have said, I'm not sure, will say yes. So
Oh,
I've really enjoyed being here. Thanks so much for having
well,
me.
I'm so honored and humbled to have heard that. And I forgot, I do have one more question for you. I like to ask
Mhm.
all my guests when we go out here is, in this crazy, chaotic world, matrix
Mhm.
simulation, whatever it is, how do you like to ground yourself? What is your go-to grounding technique?
Wow. During the summer, it's the gardening, the working in the fields that I do. Just normally just having to have my hands in the soil kind of takes you away from anything at all. If somebody's not gardening, um, then my next suggestion is often going out somewhere in nature that usually has some water and just sitting and looking out towards the water, for me, is another thing that kind of just um, pushes a lot of the world away for a while. And I think we all need to take little breaks in this. And unfortunately, I think 2022 is going to be even harder for a lot of us. And so we have to really hold on to our courage, hold on to the clarity that we already hold, and like you say, be willing to open new doors, be willing to, because I think as bad as this is going to be and as bad as messy as this is, there's there's doorways of opportunity, not like for humans, not for like the world, but for individual people that are willing to take 3, 4, and 5 steps beyond where they are. I think those doors are open for you right now. And if you're willing to have the courage to be willing to go some of the places you've maybe haven't gone yet, I think you can. I think you can do what might have taken 5 or 10 years. You might be able to do it in 5 or 10 weeks. So I think hold that with you. That even though it's difficult and messy and challenging, I think there's, for individuals out there who want it, there's doorways of real knowing and real deep understanding waiting for you.
Wow, that is an incredible way to go out, my friend. I want to thank you so much for coming on. I want to thank the audience for being here and being part of what's occurring in this world. So we'll say goodbye to our audience. Goodbye, everybody. We will talk to you later.